All right, so if you turn to page 10 in your book, there'll be some notes there and a blank note page you can utilize however you see fit. Like Joe and Mark said, we're going to talk today about the question, how do you avoid burnout and serve faithfully for the long haul? Who loves to be burnt out? Yeah, who loves to start a race and not finish because you're too exhausted? No, we want to finish well, right? So that's what we're going to talk through this morning. So I want to start with a question. What happens when something is filled over capacity? What happens when something is filled over capacity? Take a look. It's pretty fun, right? It's fun until it's you, right? What happens when someone is filled over capacity? Same thing. Same thing. Living over capacity, and some of you know this experientially, living over capacity is dangerous. It has serious consequences, not only to you, but to the people around you. So, to avoid burnout and serve faithfully for the long haul, here's the big idea. We must learn to two things. Live within our God-given limits. That's first. Learn to live within our God-given limits. And two, look out for idols in our hearts that tempt us to live over capacity and out of balance. So this right here is the antidote to burnout. This is the way that we together can serve faithfully for the long haul. So we're going to walk through these things one by one. So first, we must learn to live within our God-given limits. And we'll have some interaction at the end. It won't be as much as Jeff last night. I'm not going to make you do soulmates or elbow partners, but there will be some interaction towards the end. So just take notes and then we can unpack it together at the end. So first, learn to live within your God-given limits. The reality is you and I, all of us, have a variety of limits, right? There's only one limitless being in the universe, and he's not present in human body in this room right here. He's here by his spirit, but there's one limitless being and you are not him. But it's tempting, especially for those who consider themselves high capacity leaders, right? Would anyone consider yourself a high capacity leader? It's tempting for people, high capacity people, to try to live as if we are limited. To do more than we can realistically do, to do more than we can healthily do. And it's also tempting, even in a church, even on a ministry team, to ask other people to do more than they can realistically or healthily do. Right? Some of you in this room have been asked to do more than is good for you. We all have limits. That's just the reality. And these limits are intentional. They are intentional, given to us by a God who loves us. There's a great verse in Psalm 139, you may know it, verse 13 and 14. It says, "You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." You ever heard that one before? Mm-hmm. Yeah. The truth is, our wonderfully madeness includes our limits. God has given each of us limits and gifts. You could say weaknesses and strengths. We are a wonderfully unique package, each one of us, of intentional gifts and intentional limits. We've each been given gifts from God, which we love to talk about, right? Look at where I'm gifted. Look at what I can do. But we've each also been assigned limits by God, which we're not so big on talking about. So let's do that. Let's talk about how limited we actually are, and maybe we'll find some freedom in our limitedness today. So we all have a wide array of limits, right? We have limited perspective. We have limited energy, except for maybe Joe. We have limited maturity. There are lots of limits we could talk through today. We could make a list probably of 20, 30, 40 limits. But I want to focus on perhaps the two biggest limits that we all have, which are limited gifting and limited time. So let's first address limited gifting. We are all limited in our gifts, both spiritual and natural, right? Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12, Ephesians 4, and 1 Peter 4 all talk about spiritual gifts. And some of them are, right, administration, evangelism, mercy, teaching, leadership, helping, healing, giving. There's a variety of spiritual gifts. And we won't go into a deep dive into spiritual gifts today, but I think it's important to know, and this may seem obvious, but it's important to know, not everyone has every gift. There are no all-gifted Christians. And most of us only have a few gifts, maybe like a handful max. And this is important to remember, that in Jesus' leadership structure for his church, there is no one leader who's designed to know everything or do everything. And it's dangerous for any one leader to try, including senior pastor. I need you and your gifts. You need me and my gifts. We all need each other to become all that Jesus desires us to be and to do all that Jesus desires us to do. We are all limited in our gifting. Let's say that together. I am limited. I am limited. And that's a beautiful reality. We're all limited, and that's why we need each other. Together, we become a wonderfully functioning body of Christ, like Jeff was talking through last night. We all have limited spiritual gifts, like I said, maybe a handful max, and we also have limited natural gifts, right? Not everyone is gifted in words like Mark and Joe are. Not everyone excels in math like our accountants. Not everyone is a natural musician or an artist or an athlete. We are all given gifts by God, and we are all assigned limits from God, both spiritual and natural. So, as a church community, and especially as a community of leaders, because of our limits, we must rely on others who are gifted in ways that we're not. You have gifts that I need. I have gifts that you need. So let's rely on one another. And because of our limits, we should allow other people's strengths to complement and supplement our weaknesses. I need to know where I'm weak so Jeff can come in with his strength. I'm weaker interpersonally. Jeff is strong interpersonally. I'm strong administratively. Jeff's a little bit weaker there. We need each other. We complement each other and supplement our weaknesses with our strengths. And I could go through this room and list 100 examples of how that plays out in the life of our body. And here's a key. Because of our limits, we should be careful to not compare your weaknesses with other people's strengths. Man, I wish I could preach like Todd. Man, I wish I could be a light of joy in any room I come into like Ron. Man, I wish I was like name whoever. Let's be careful to not compare our limits with other people's strengths. That's very important, especially in a comparison culture. Your job, every one of your jobs, is not to be someone else. Your job is not to use someone else's gifts to do someone else's ministry. Your job is to be who God created you to be, to faithfully use whatever gifts He's given you. And to be okay with, to be comfortable and confident living within your assigned limits. Isn't there freedom there? Like, it's okay to be limited. It's okay for me not to be like this person or that person. God has intentionally designed me to be this way. So let's be comfortable and confident within our limits. So we not only have limited gifts, but we also have limited time. Right? As far as I know, we all live within a 24/7 time frame. Anybody have like a 29/7 time frame or a 24/10 time frame? Some of you wish you had a 29/7 or 24/10. Every person lives within 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no exceptions. We all are limited by time. Here's an illustration that I think can be helpful. It's called the 24/7 circle, and this was from Paul Tripp in his book Lead. All of our various roles and responsibilities play out within this 24/7 circle. I think there's a lot of other categories. We've just put 4 up here, just as an example. But here's the key. The large circle of time cannot expand. So if one of the 4 circles in this big circle grow and expand, other circles will naturally shrink, right? Here's an example. So if you're a bit lazy and your leisure circle grows, maybe your labor circle will shrink and you'll not be as effective at work. Or your spiritual life will shrink because you're too busy watching YouTube. Or your relational life will shrink because you want to just stay home and watch TV all day. That's one example. If one circle grows, other circles naturally shrink. Here's another example. I think this is where high-capacity leaders get into trouble. As leaders, our tendency can be to enlarge the labor circle, right? I'm looking at a ton of high-capacity leaders in this room, and this is our temptation. Working 50, 60 hours in the office, on top of serving too many hours on too many teams in too many ministries on the church. Now, maybe there's a season for overworking. There's seasons and cycles in all of our lives that require extra energy and effort. But it's important to know that when one circle gets bigger, other circles naturally shrink. So I think it's helpful for all of us to kind of evaluate, like right now, in this moment, is there any circle in my life that has grown too large? But what I want you to do, take a minute and just think through your life right now and draw a model of your life. These 4 circles, draw a model of your life in the margin of your book. Is there one area right now that is unnecessarily large and needs to, by God's grace, be brought back down to its right size? Right, and just to be clear, I mean, we're Christians, we're gospel-centered people. There's no shame if you got one circle right now that's just huge in your life. There's no shame in that, but it's helpful to see and to assess kind of where am I at? What's the flow of my life, the margin that I have? Is there one circle that's too large? So for me right now, my labor circle is slightly enlarged. There's been other seasons when it's just been ginormous. Right now, my labor is slightly enlarged. Actually, this is probably this is probably me right now. My labor is a little bit big. Spiritual is shrunk. I need to really consider that. And my leisure is a little bit small as well. I need to, probably would be wise to find some margin for rest and refreshment. So take that for what it is. Again, I think there's other circles you could put in there, but all of us live within 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So what you just did, your self-assessment, I think is helpful. It's probably even more helpful to ask others to speak into your life on this, right? I need Ashley to speak into my life on this. I need friends and brothers to speak into my life on this. So maybe ask your spouse later, ask a friend, ask a small group leader, ask a coworker even. Hey, where do you think I am with these 4 circles? And that might shed some light on that as well. Because left unchecked, our life and leadership can get out of balance really quickly, and like we saw in our opening video, consequences will follow. Our own health can suffer. Some of you have been there, right? Physical health, mental health, emotional health. Our health can suffer, our families can suffer, our church can be affected, and our community as well. So it'd be wise to invite other people in and be diligent to watch and care for one another in this space of time. All right. There's a great biblical example of living beyond capacity. If you know your Bible, Exodus 18, it's a story of Moses. And I kind of want to just walk through this with you because I think there's some helpful things in here for us. So Exodus 18, starting in verse 14. So Moses, just backstory, he was responsible for overseeing hundreds of thousands of people. So his capacity requirement was quite a bit larger, I think, than any of ours in this room. Hundreds of thousands of people. And Moses' father-in-law comes into town to visit, and he questions him in verse 14. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this that you're doing for all the people? Why do you sit alone and all the people stand around you from morning till evening?" And Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God." So Moses' response is essentially, "Don't you understand, Jethro? God needs me. I'm doing God's work." Have you ever thought that? Man, God needs me. People really need me. And I don't know Moses' heart, so I'm just reading my own into his story. But perhaps Moses' way of thinking is more filled with pride than faithfulness. Or perhaps it's coming from a place of him feeling the need to prove himself to other people. Or maybe Moses' motives were pure, but it's still not healthy, right? So verse 17, Moses' father-in-law says to him, what you are doing is not good, Moses. You're over capacity. It's not good. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out. In our word, burnout. You'll wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you, and you are not able to do it alone. So in our terms, Jethro might say, Moses, in order to avoid burnout and serve faithfully for the long haul, you must learn to live within your God-given limits. Now, I know, Moses, you're a high-capacity leader, but it seems that the labor circle right now in your life has grown way too large. So Moses, Jethro is saying, would you admit your limits honestly and embrace your limits humbly? Those are great questions for us to ask. Will we embrace our limits humbly and admit our limits honestly? So verse 19, Jethro, rather than just pointing out a problem, he also puts forth a solution. Jethro says to Moses, now, obey my voice, and I will give you advice, and God be with you. You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God. You shall warn them about the statutes and the law, and make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do. Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, men who are trustworthy and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And I think the responsibilities are assigned based on these men's gifting and limits. The capacity of these men, I think they give thousands or hundreds or fifties or tens. Verse 22 goes on to say, and let them judge the people at all times. Every great matter they shall bring to you, Moses, but any small matter they shall decide themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, God will direct you. You will be able to endure. We would add for the long haul, right? That's our terminology, endure for the long haul. And all this people also will go to their place in peace. Because remember, living within your limits doesn't just benefit you, it benefits everyone around you. So like Moses, though we all have different settings with different responsibilities, it's easy for us to find ourselves over capacity and out of balance. Let's just raise hands. Has anyone ever felt over capacity and out of balance? Yeah, it's a large majority of people in this room. It's easy for us to try to do more than we can realistically and healthily do, even when we're doing good things, godly things, ministry things. But if left unchecked by people who love us, it'll end badly every time. So I want to kind of transition to ask the question, why? Why are we so prone to live beyond our limits? Why is it so easy for us to find ourselves living over capacity? I think the answer is because of idols in our hearts that tempt us to be more than God has called us to be or do more than God has called us to be. The issue, the reason for overcapacity is idolatry in our hearts. So in order to avoid burnout and serve faithfully for the long haul, we must secondly look out for idols in our hearts that tempt us to live over capacity and out of balance. Again, we don't have time for a deep dive into idolatry today, but I do want us to consider two questions. What is an idol, and why are idols so dangerous? So what is an idol, and why are they dangerous? First, what is an idol? An idol is anything that at any moment is more important to you than God. An idol is anything at any moment that is more important to you than God. And when an idol takes on greater weight in your heart, when it latches on and becomes more important than God, it knocks everything else in your life out of balance. And here's the scary thing. We are so good at idolatry that we can even turn good things like ministry, like serving people. We can turn good things into God things. Even ministry, serving in a role in a church, can become an idol in our life. Or, and this is probably more often the case, an idol in our heart can undermine or misalign our ministry. Man, I've been there. I'm assuming many of you have been there. An idol in our heart can undermine or misalign our ministry. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. I think there are 4 core idols. We've talked about this as a staff. There are a lot of surface idols in our life, but I think there's 4 source idols that can root themselves really deep in our heart. I don't have these in your notes, but if you want to write them down, the 4 source idols, the 4 core idols are approval, power, control, and comfort. Approval, the idol of approval, power, an idol of power, control, and comfort. Now, I think at any moment we can all kind of default to some of these idols in our hearts, but I think for most of us, there is 1 or 2 of these that are just prominent. Like for me, this idol of power continues to play itself out in my life. For others, I know approval is a big thing, and I have some of that as well. Control, I have some of that. Maybe I have all these. And comfort. So let's talk through. If you have an idol of approval, here's what it might look like in ministry, okay? If you have an idol of approval, you might try to do a good job in your role, not for the glory of God, but so that others will like you and think that you're great, right? If you have an idol of approval, you might do great work in ministry so that other people think that you're great. If you have an idol of power, which is, I just said, I have this one, I believe, and I've lived here for years. If you have an idol of power, you may use ministry to make a name for yourself. That's scary. Using ministry to make a name for yourself. If you have an idol of power, you might use people to build up your ministry rather than using ministry to build up people. That's dangerous. If you have an idol of control, you might try to micromanage people in your ministry. You might stress them out intentionally or unintentionally and make them feel that whatever they do is never good enough. Or if you have an idol of comfort, you might be lazy in your ministry role. You might show up late. You might give it less than your best. And when the time's needed to have a hard conversation, you might avoid that altogether. So these are just some examples of the effects of idolatry in our heart. There are many more, and I think interpersonally we could talk through these things at a deeper level. But here's the thing, idolatry is so dangerous because it's so subtle. Like right now, in every single one of your hearts, there is an idol operating, and I can't see it. I can't see it from here. The only way we could see idols in our hearts is through close encounters and deep interactions together. Idolatry is often under the surface of our lives in our hearts and can only be exposed through close encounters. And this is why we need each other. The reality for every one of us is that idolatry will continue to be an ongoing issue in each of our hearts until Jesus takes us home. And because that's the case, exposing idols and addressing idols must be a regular conversation in our leadership community together. When we find ourselves living out of balance, if you're assessing your life and you're like, man, I'm way out of balance right now, we must learn to look deeply for what idol in my heart is tempting me to live beyond my capacity. And when we see other people in our community, on our teams, living out of balance, we must learn to enter in gently, graciously, kindly, of course, to help other people look for the idols that are deep in their hearts. So as a leadership community, can we commit together to exposing and addressing the idols in our own hearts? And can we commit together to love each other enough to help each other do the same? Can we commit to that together? Let's look for the idols that are deep, deep within our hearts that may be affecting our lives and our ability to live in a healthy way. So with that in mind, I want to practice that right now, okay? So take a look in your book on page 10. We've got listed there 14 signs that your heart may be out of balance. So again, this is just a sampling of areas. There are no doubt other areas, but I think this is a helpful list that may reveal some idolatry in your heart through an out of balance life. So there's going to be a two-part activity. First part, you're going to take 2 minutes personally. Look at this list and select the top 5 areas where you may be out of balance right now. So another way to say it, top 5 areas that you are struggling with, may need help in, or would like to grow in. So take a look at the list and mark down the top 5 areas for you. And if you don't have 5, that's okay. If you have more than 5, that's okay. But try to whittle it down to pick your top 5. Top 5. All right, here's what we're going to do, part 2. Well, let me first share with you my 5. This is what we're going to do. I'm going to kind of demonstrate what we're going to do, and then we're going to break into groups of 3 or 4 men with men and 3 or 4 women with women. So unlike last night, we're not going to make you look at your shoes or anything. Just find, if you're a guy, find 2 or 3 other guys. If you're a girl, find 2 or 3 other girls. And this is what we're going to do. Each person is just going to go around and share honestly. So like for me and my group, I'm going to say, man, the top 5 I'm struggling with right now are marriage problems, lack of commitment to a regular devotional life, no regular commitment to Sabbaths of rest, anger, and those 4 have been historic trends. One that's popped up recently is discouragement, depression, and maybe a little bit of burnout. I'm going to confess mine. You're not going to respond with, oh, I think you should do this, I think you should do that. You're just going to listen. You're going to share honestly, listen well, and then go to the next person. Okay? The next person's going to share. You're going to share honestly, listen well, go to the next person. Okay, this is not a time to try to counsel or to fix. This is just a time to share honestly. And here's the thing. This may be really uncomfortable for some of you, and I'm sorry for that. I think by the end, it's going to be less uncomfortable for you. But here's what's going to need to happen. Someone in your group is going to need to go first. So someone just step up and share, because vulnerability breeds vulnerability. So someone's going to need to go first. After every person shares their top 5, you're going to pray for every person. Quick prayers. We don't have a ton of time. So someone shares. Actually, let's do this. Change of plan. After someone shares, just pray for them right then. Go to the next person, pray for them right then. Because James 5:16 says, confess your sins to one another and pray for each other that you may be healed. There's something in there. God's given us some sort of rhythm there. Confess and pray. All right, so let's break into groups of 3 or 4 men, 3 or 4 women, and we'll spend about 5 or so minutes on this. All right, so isn't it freeing to be able to admit struggles and weakness? You know, there's areas in all of our lives that we're doing really well in, and that's amazing. And there's other areas that we all struggle. We all struggle. So just to have a place, and especially a leadership team of people who can just admit their limits and their weaknesses and their struggles honestly, and to just walk into that humbly, that's a gift. What just happened in this room is a gift to each one of us. Amen. All right, and just want to make clear, that's not a one and done activity. This is a lifestyle, right? So, application for after. If there was someone or something that was said in your group and the Spirit put it on your heart, hey, follow up with that person after. Catch them in the hallway, catch them at lunch. Just bring some encouragement, maybe some challenge if needed. Just take whatever the Spirit gave you in this moment and use it to encourage and build up later today. All right, so how do we avoid burnout and serve faithfully for the long haul? We learn to live within our God-given limits and look out for idols in our hearts.